So my special guest tonight is part of the abandoned Biden campaign, and I want to go ahead and bring him in. Ahmad, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Sorry for my delay. Sorry for being late.
Oh, no worries. I'm glad to have you here. I'm pretty sure as you've been paying attention, just like a lot of us have, I know you were a part of the abandoned Biden campaign. Given the recent switch, now that the Democrat candidate is Kamala Harris and not Joe Biden, I'm curious where this movement now stands. How do you feel about Kamala Harris now assuming this position? And do you still feel that you would abandon her as well when it comes to this issue in Gaza?
So when Joe Biden announced that he would no longer be seeking re-election, we put out a press release in which we made it very clear that we are not the kind of people who are going to individualize the evil that we saw these past 10 months in terms of the U.S. foreign policy in regard to Israel and Gaza. And that we didn't see Joe Biden as the sole figure who was responsible. Joe Biden was the head of the snake. There were multiple people in that administration who supported him, backed him. One of those people is Kamala Harris, who was his number two. And in regard to people who want to sort of try and distance Kamala Harris from Joe Biden's approach towards Gaza, I would point to two things. Number one, I've mentioned this multiple times before, Rifat al-Hariri, an academic in Gaza, on Twitter, whose handle is iTranslate123. The last tweet that he had before Israel killed him in a missile strike was him quote tweeting Kamala Harris saying Israel has the right to defend itself with the Democratic Party is responsible for the genocide in Gaza. That's number one. Number two, I think it behooves us to pay attention to when John Kirby said in regard to Kamala Harris when he was asked about her was that she has been and still is a full partner with regard to Joe Biden's policy when it comes to Gaza and the Middle East. So again, we're not going to individualize this evil as solely being Joe Biden. When he's gone, everything is fine. No, there's an entire apparatus, there's an entire machinery. There was an entire group of people who supported Joe Biden, backed him, and didn't distance themselves at any point during the last 10 months when it would have been actually courageous to do so.
I totally hear where you're coming from. That is good to hear because I will tell you the sentiment that I am hearing from people, even those that were a part of the pro-Palestinian movement, it has greatly shifted since Kamala has been announced as the candidate for the Democratic Party. And it's interesting considering none of us voted for Kamala Harris in a Democrat primary. She was just selected, just chosen, and became the nominee. And I am greatly concerned because I see a movement that once again seems to have been co-opted by the Democratic Party, and they have funneled that energy back into the Democratic Party. The last time I saw this was the George Floyd protest, of course. There were a number of demands from people on the ground. And the moment that Joe Biden won, a lot of those protesters went right back home and those demands were not met. Now I'm seeing this happen again since the announcement of Kamala Harris. And I'm not speaking to the people who are watching right now that are Democrat Party loyalists, because I expect you to vote for the Democratic Party. Same thing if you're a Republican Party loyalist, you're going to vote for the party regardless of who the candidate is. But I'm speaking to the people that were pro-Palestinian activists on the ground with people like myself who have now all of a sudden decided that genocide is not a red line. And it is really upsetting to me because I don't think, for whatever reason, people are not making the connection that you just laid out, Ahmad, that she is very much complicit in this. She is very much a part of it. Why do you feel that people are just ready to flip?
I think people were looking for an excuse to flip. I think, and I mentioned this on Bad Faith podcast, the average person needs to look internally and deeply within themselves to assess, are they really willing to put what matters on the line for what they claim to be are their principles and their morals and their ethics, or are they just fine with optics? I I think we saw this during the Barack Obama presidency. There really was no anti-war movement. We saw this again during Joe Biden's 4 years. People seemed content to just coast by as everything was happening. And I bring this up in the sense that what we're hearing now in terms of people trying to emotionally manipulate us into voting for the Democratic Party because Kamala Harris is presumptively going to be the DNC nominee for 2024 is vote for Kamala now and hold her accountable, right? Vote for the Democratic nominee and then work to hold them accountable. And people will say this as if those same individuals were also saying 4 years ago the same exact thing about Joe Biden. Not just that, but they were also saying things in the same breath, vote for Biden so that we can all go back to brunch. It's very demeaning to be spoken to in this manner, as if our memories are very short. When we did try to hold Joe Biden accountable at his rallies, we showed up and we yelled out and we started trying to hold him accountable. Those same people who were saying, vote for Biden and then hold him accountable, drowned out our shouts with chants of 4 more years, as a genocide was happening, as those images and videos of Palestinians being torn to shreds were showing up every single day, and every day was more gruesome than the last. Those people still chanted 4 more years, 4 more years. Again, we're not going to fall for old tricks. We're not going to allow ourselves to be complacent. This is not the time for people to try and push things 4 years down the line. We're going to have this conversation now. And look, it's going to be a difficult conversation, but at the same time, for those individuals that you mentioned, I would ask a very important question. In my limited experience, lesser evil voting became an actual topic around 2012 when it was between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. I'd ask those people in 2012, did you see yourself 12 years down the line minimizing a genocide? Did you really see yourself doing that? To see images 10 months in, we're now entering our 11th month, of the most gruesome brutality you could ever picture or imagine. And forget even the pictures and images, just listening to the testimonies of doctors who spent their entire life volunteering in war zones, coming back and saying that alone, that Gaza Strip alone, is worse than everything I've ever experienced combined. Did you ever see yourself minimizing that and trying to place that as one issue amongst other issues? Lesser evil voting and this mentality of lesser evil voting, people haven't noticed how it slowly made them erode morally and ethically. And I think that's an important conversation to have. And I think that's a very important question that needs to be asked.
I have to say this. Earlier today, it was announced that Kamala Harris has selected Tim Walz as her VP, as her running mate, someone who is a little to the left of her, but I will still call him a moderate. I get into that a lot later, you guys, when we get into that story. But a number of people, and including those in independent media, immediately said, yes, now she can win. I'm talking about people that have been debating Zionists since October 7th on Piers Morgan's show and other shows, people who have been talking about this conflict since October 7th in support of Gaza and the Palestinians, all of a sudden just jumped on board. And I have to ask, how do you feel about that? Because I told someone earlier today, I said, honestly, if I was Palestinian, I would be really pissed off.
Again, it goes back to the concept of optics and feel-good politics. I was very dismayed and very upset to see people immediately jump on the Kamala Harris train without her announcing a single shift in policy. She hasn't held a single press conference talking about how her policy would be different. People want to point to the fact that she did not attend Netanyahu's address. She didn't, but she met with him behind closed doors. Well, what about what she said about how she will not be silent regarding the killing and happening in Gaza? Yes, but condemnation of killing is meaningless when you're still fully willing to arm the killers. Again, this is what I mean when I talk about empty, meaningless rhetoric. People who find themselves placated by that empty, meaningless, feel-good rhetoric, I would venture as far as saying weren't any substantial allies whatsoever. They hopped off the Joe Biden train for the wrong reason. They're now endorsing Kamala Harris for the wrong reason. They're celebrating the Tim Walz pick over Shapiro for the wrong reasons. And I say that in the sense that a lot of people jumped off the Joe Biden train after his June 27th debate with Donald Trump. It wasn't because of his backing, funding, endorsing, and acting as a mouthpiece for a genocidal apartheid regime. They did it because it became very clear to the country and to the entire world that he was no longer cognitively fit to lead. And so forcing him to step down, again, was for the wrong reasons. It wasn't because of his role in genocide that we're seeing now. It was because of the fact that they said our personal interests are now at stake. And now with this Tim Walz pick, and people want to frame it as though it was because Shapiro was too pro-Israeli. No, we're of the opinion actually that it was because of everything else that popped up. The Shapiro covering up a murder, a lot of skeletons in Shapiro closet that had nothing to do with Israel, quite frankly. Again, people have no idea. A couple of weeks ago, Palestinians in Minnesota, his actual constituents in Minnesota, showed up to meet with him. And when he found out that it wasn't just going to be for the sake of a photo op, and he wasn't going to be allowed to just sit there and nod his head as they talked about their trauma, they were going to have actual, tangible demands that they needed from him. That meeting was canceled. And that was a couple of weeks ago. Again, this is what we talk about when we are discussing the concept of meaningless optics. What's going on here? Why are we being placated by meaningless optics? Did we actually care about this in the first place? Or were we looking for a reason to take the first exit ramp off this very difficult road in order to sort of make ourselves feel good? Again, very difficult questions that need to be asked to these individuals who find themselves riding a train that is not based on any actual substance whatsoever.
And I actually have that clip. I'm glad you brought that up. Here's that clip that he is referring to. Governor Walz cancels meeting with Gazan families on the spot. Everyone listen to this.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Sanat Waswas from AMP. I'm standing here outside of the Minnesota State Capitol with our AMP members and Gaza families here from Minnesota. And I'm just here to tell you that we were supposed to meet with Governor Walz and our meeting got canceled. We met with the staff right before then, and they were under the impression that we were going to talk about our stories and just share our stories and cry and play the victimhood narrative. But as soon as we told them that we would not just share our victimhood, but talk about how we can materially affect change, how Governor Walz can and should divest from the SBI, that's when they decided to go deliberate, and then they came back and informed us that our meeting was canceled. They used the excuse that Governor Walz just wanted to hear families tell their stories, but didn't actually want to hear about the material changes, that this would be too long of a process. We know that this is a major excuse from Governor Walz. Families have been requesting to meet with him for months and months upon end. And as we reach the 10th month, and Governor Walz has refused to express any real, genuine solidarity with the Palestinian people, has refused to call for divestment, we see that this is clearly all talk, and this is just empty words from Governor Walz, that the real reason that they canceled the meeting is that they don't actually want to take any real effort to affect freedom and liberation for Palestine.
Right. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I had this ready to go because I saw this earlier as well. But yeah, see, this is something that people are not mentioning about Governor Walz. Obviously, you're hearing from Palestinian families right there. People are leaving this out. A lot of people are just talking about some of the good things that he did for Minnesota, and there are some good things that he has done. But they're not talking about his record on Israel, which I will get into later on tonight. They're not talking about how these families have been rejected to meet with Governor Walz. These are very important things. And I think a lot of people are being gaslighted right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think so let me give everyone a timeline. Back when everything in Gaza started post October 7th in the mainstream media, this did not start on October 7th. This has been going on for a long, long time. Back when Abandon Biden formed, we gave Joe Biden an ultimatum. You have 2 weeks to call for and enforce a permanent ceasefire, or else we will campaign against you. October 31st came and went. That deadline was missed. It was not met. The ultimatum was not met. So we made it a point saying, from now on, we are going to campaign against Joe Biden. And from that point, from then on, up until the June 27th debate, we were subjected to some of the most grotesque rhetoric on the internet and in person and on the mainstream media that one can possibly think of. And I say that in the sense of people were saying things that if I had written it down and I said, hey, which side of the political aisle do you think this rhetoric came from? People would say, well, this obviously came from Trump supporters. It did not. It came from Joe Biden supporters. People saying things like, well, when Donald Trump deports you, don't cry about it. Or when Donald Trump does X, I'm just going to sit down and eat popcorn and watch. That's the kind of rhetoric we were subjected to when we said we're not going to vote for Joe Biden because of his genocide. And then another group started posturing, saying, well, the Palestinians aren't going to be any better under Donald Trump. And our immediate response was like, yeah, we're not voting for Donald Trump. We're saying that we're not going to vote for Joe Biden. Again, from November 1st, 2023 till June 27th, 2024, that was the rhetoric we were subjected to. After the entire nation or the entire Democratic Party seemed to flip on Joe Biden immediately post that debate, we saw a lot of that rhetoric die down immediately. But we weren't really happy because we knew it was for the wrong reasons. When Joe Biden stepped down and it was announced Kamala Harris was going to be, was most likely going to be the nominee, she had received Joe Biden's endorsement, that rhetoric came back exactly as it was before then. People took a break and it came back to the same type of vitriol and venom that we experienced on November 1st, 2023 until June 27th. We're under no illusions of what's going to happen if we get our way. We are under no illusions that the same people who rush to help those who were directly affected by Donald Trump's policies are going to sit back and say, well, we told you so. You should have listened to us. We understand the ramifications that come with being probably the first voting group in the United States in modern memory to say we will not fall into the trap of lesser evil voting. We are going to utilize our votes some other way. We understand that because the people who rushed our help in 2016 are going to sit by and do nothing. And the party whose sole platform relies on them saying, look how bad the other side is, needs to ensure that this group that decided to break away from the status quo is made an example of. We can't have other minority voters in the United States of America saying, well, they did it, why can't we? Why can't we withhold our vote? Why can't we leverage our vote? Why can't we have actual demands that are beyond crumbs? We're very well aware of that. And I don't know what the future holds. I really don't. But all I know is that morally, ethically, we cannot, in good conscience, vote for the party that has been fully complicit in this genocide led by Joe Biden.
I totally hear you. And I was very skeptical of some of the media figures that decided to come out and support the pro-Palestinian movement after October 7th, because even before October 7th, there were a couple of us in indie media that we were talking about what was happening between Israel and the Palestinians years ago. I think that the very first time I covered it on this show was the first year of this show. And I remember back then a number of people telling me that this was not an important issue. And it was interesting to me that all of a sudden after October 7th, a number of people just jumped on this topic and all of a sudden was pro-Palestinian and save and protect the Palestinian people when they didn't care about it prior to October 7th. And now some of those same people are the ones that are willing to just say, forget this, we're just going to vote for Kamala Harris. It's really sad. And I think it's pathetic because if you say that genocide is a red line, then that means it's a red line. And that doesn't mean you go vote for Donald Trump. You don't have to vote for anyone. But I'm curious what that would look like for you. I've been trying to tell people that if genocide is a red line for you, then and you do want to vote, you should support the third party or independent candidates that are running correctly on this issue. And I'm curious, when it comes to the Abandon Biden movement, is it moving in that direction, or do you think more people are likely to stay at home?
So when we talk about the Muslim American community, you need to realize that this is a community that has voted majority Democrat for about 24 years. Around 2 decades. And so when this movement emerged, we realized that we are now talking to people on a wide political spectrum. And so our message had to start very basic, and then our goal was to take the voter on a journey in which from November 1st, 2023, up until November 2024, the day of the election, their attitude and their belief and their outlook towards what a vote actually is changes. I need to emphasize, we are not sitting here saying that voting is the end all be all. We are not these groups that pop up every 4 years and say, you want change, vote. There's a lot of work that happens. But again, a punch consists of a fist, ideally with 5 fingers, right? One of those fingers is voting. There's a lot of other work that has to go. But voting is a voice, is a tool that we have. Now, the people who are willing to stand in line at the polls and vote, we'll tell them, look, it's not either or. It's not either or. You can vote some other way, even if you stand in line at the poll and just write Gaza or write Free Palestine. The important thing is that you are tallied as someone who is willing to stand in line and take hours out of your day to cast a vote. Now, we do have some individuals who say, well, I am discontent with both parties. I'm just going to sit at home. There is no good in electoral politics whatsoever. And to those people, our message has sort of been around the idea of, look, here's an example that we have. In terms of business, right? There is a cost to acquire a customer, and there is a cost to retain a customer. Acquiring a customer is much more expensive than retaining a customer. So if I, as a politician, am looking at a constituency and I see the non-voters, number one, I need to allocate 2 types of resources. The first is to convince them to vote. And let's say I spend that resources to convince them to vote. There's no guarantee that they're going to vote for me. They may vote for my opponent. So now I have to spend resources to get them to vote, and then more resources to convince them to vote for me. My ideal situation with these non-voters is I don't care what they want, what concerns they have. I don't care about any of that. I'd like them just to stay out of the race. Now, the people who do vote, the people who do stand in line, the people who do take out the time to cast the ballot, I will allocate my resources towards convincing them why they should vote for me. And so in convincing these non-voters within our community, we tell them, if you want your voice heard, one of the ways of doing it is through voting. It is not necessarily the most important way or the most effective way, but it is a way, a tool, a method that needs and should be utilized along with other methods and other tools. We have had some people who have expressed some sort of skepticism in regard to third-party voting. Abandoned Biden has not endorsed any third parties. Our message has solely been about getting people to vote their conscience and to actually put forth the effort into using this voice. But for the people who have expressed some sort of skepticism around casting a vote outside of the two-party system, our message to them is, look, it does not matter if you vote for the Democrats enthusiastically. It does not matter if you vote for the Democrats apathetically. It does not matter if you vote for the Democrats in disgust. It does not matter if you vote for the Democrats and then get online and talk about how much you hated the fact that you had to vote for the Democrats. A vote is a vote. They don't care how they got it. They got it from you. Now we don't have to see you for the next 4 years. We got it from you, and now what we're going to do is the same tactics that we use right now to get you to vote for us. We're going to ramp it up in 4 years to ensure that we still have your vote. So it doesn't matter what emotion you have in your heart when you vote for that party. They got what they wanted out of you. You're not going to get anything that you want out of them. And so the idea of this movement is, the goal is not to win. The goal is to change the conversation. And I brought this example up on Bad Faith Pod. Bernie Sanders, who, to be fair, has absolutely disappointed me with his stance since October 7th. Credit to Brianna, his former press secretary, for calling him out immediately on that. That's what holding someone accountable is. That's what courage is. Bernie Sanders lost in 2016 and he lost in 2020. However, the conversations surrounding the issues that he was campaigning on, the way they were spoken about in 2015 was not the same way they were spoken about in 2021. A massive shift in the conversation took place, a massive shift in rhetoric, all within a span of 6 years, which really isn't that long. Again, is our goal to win, or is our goal to change the conversation?
So if the goal is to change the conversation, because I mention this a lot because I'm anti-duopoly, like I'll be supporting third parties. And I came from that Bernie movement. But I just saw that there was just no movement within the Democratic Party with the progressivism, et cetera, because of big money interests. But if the goal is to shift the conversation, why do you feel there is some skepticism among those that are part of the abandoned Biden campaign to vote for third party?
You're talking about a community that has been indoctrinated for a long, long time with the mentality of lesser evil voting. And so breaking them out of that is going to take some time. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take some patience. We have been conditioned to think and to believe that in order to enact any type of change, you need to win. And by win, I mean win an election. And if you're not going to win an election, then what's the point? The point, again, is not to win. The point is to start something. The point is to do something. The point is to change the conversation little by little. So, for example, in regards to the example I said with Bernie Sanders, people who are old enough to remember how things like universal health care was talked about in 2014, as opposed to how it was talked about now, two completely different conversations being had on polar, like, opposites. Again, this is going to take some time. This is going to take some effort, and it's going to take some patience, because people do genuinely believe that in order to actually have any type of change, you need to win. And we're trying to help people internalize the idea that change does not come when you compromise with evil. It doesn't. The only change that does happen when you compromise with evil is the change within you as an individual. You change worse little by little by little, and you don't realize it. And I even hate to say compromising with evil, because in a compromise, both sides give something up. But in this concept of lesser evil voting, we, the voters, are the only ones giving something up. We're the only ones giving anything up. It's not really a compromise. It's a capitulation, to be fair.
I totally hear you there. It sounds like we have a similar situation, because this is something that I've tried to explain to the African American community as well, that we keep voting for the Democratic Party, and whenever you ask, well, is there a Black agenda, or what are you going to do for the Black community? It's the same thing as to like, there's a lot of virtue signaling from the Democratic Party, I think, a lot of virtue signaling, but no real tangible results, no real change. But I get the same response as to, this is what we have been doing for so long. And people do feel as though, well, at least it's not the Republicans. So I totally hear what you're talking about. Like, it's a long time that people have been indoctrined into believing and feeling a certain way. So I totally hear where you're coming from about that. I worry. Do you worry what is going to happen as we get closer to November? I did not think this war in Gaza would last for as long as it has. I mean, we're coming up on a year, you guys, and I don't think at this point that this will be resolved before November, before the election. Do you worry about that? And are you concerned about what's happening in the greater scheme of things in the Middle East right now, where it's no longer just Israel is attacking Palestinians in Gaza? Now there is a conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, and also Iran.
Yeah, I'm actually very worried about the condition of the wider region. And I do believe it was a mistake to not force Joe Biden to step down from the presidency altogether, because this man is an ideologue. And he is surrounded by individuals who are also ideologues. I'm talking about Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Brett McGurk. A report came out saying that Kamala Harris, if she wins, would not retain Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. And so you have three individuals, Joe Biden, Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, who know it's their final couple months in office to actually push through the vision for the Middle East that they have, and they will do it at any cost. So basically, we're giving someone tools and telling them you have 4 or 5 months left. What did we think was going to happen? They're going to run amok, and we're all going to have to pay the price for it, because they're like, well, I'm not going to be in office in 4 or 5 months. Let me just go full speed ahead, pedal to the metal. There is a concern. The closer we get to November 5th, will the Muslim American community be placated by Joe Biden stepping down and not seeking re-election, by Kamala Harris's softer, little bit softer rhetoric, by her selecting Waltz? I don't know. But I do know is that we are still paying attention to the brutality that is taking place in Gaza right now. We are still listening to the testimonies of the doctors who are coming out of Gaza right now. Doctors who are saying, never in my life have I seen what I saw there. And while I've always been prepared for war zones, I was not prepared for the amount of children I saw being shot in the head by snipers twice. So it's not a mistake. It's not an accident. It's a deliberate killing. It's a deliberate massacre that's taking place. We're paying attention to this. We're still cognizant of what's going on. I can't speak for every single individual within the Ban Biden movement. I can't speak on behalf of every Muslim American voter within the United States of America. But I will say this. The election is going to be in November. In October, we're going to revisit the annual anniversary of certain things that took place due to the rhetoric that came out from Joe Biden and the Democrats. And I'll give you one of those. The stabbing of a 6-year-old boy 26 times in Chicago by his parents' landlord because of Joe Biden's dehumanizing rhetoric. because of the viciousness and brutality that we saw in Gaza that was backed by almost every single Democrat in October. We are going to revisit those moments, and we're going to remember how we felt, the helplessness that we felt, the anger we felt, the sadness and the rage that we felt. We're going to remember that. And we are insistent that we are going to send a message. If you run on genocide, you will not win.
I think that is a great message to send. I have to tell you, I am been very disappointed, but not surprised with the way that our government has responded to all of this. And I say this because for years, I've watched the US government not hold Israel accountable. The last time that I read that this happened was under Ronald Reagan, when there was air fire between Israel and Lebanon at that point in time. And there was some public outcry. So because there was some public outcry, Ronald Reagan said, nope, you got to stop. You can't continue this, right? Now that's like even impossible to think of our politicians like pushing for something like that. And this whole rhetoric around a ceasefire, the way that they have spoken about this, the Biden-Harris administration, it's mainly a temporary pause. It's not a permanent ceasefire. I think they've been deceiving a lot of people with that as well. And I'm curious how you feel about the way the media has handled this situation, because I noticed that they slowly over time decided to stop covering it. And I had a feeling this was going to happen. This happened during the George Floyd protests. They were covering it heavily at first. Then when more and more people came out into the streets, they're like, okay, we need to kind of scale it back now, not give it as much attention. And so if you are not out there with the protesters, you think in your mind, just by watching mainstream media, oh, it's all over. No one's talking about it right now. But people are still protesting against Israel and against the genocide. How do you feel about the way the media has handled the coverage of the genocide of the Palestinian people?
From the very beginning until now, the mainstream American media has acted as an extension, as a mouthpiece for the Israeli government, which is shocking because it's become apparent that if you want to see any reporting that is critical of the Israeli government, you have to actually read Israeli newspapers. Passing off what the Israeli government says as verifiable fact, time and time and time again, means that the US mainstream media is complicit. And it's not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's purposeful because it's a consistent theme that's happened throughout my entire lifetime, but specifically since October 7th. And we're talking about a genocide that is being live streamed and broadcast on social media. And so you have an instance where the Israeli government drops a bomb on a refugee camp, killing 400 people and saying, oh, well, there was Hamas terrorists there. No journalistic due diligence, no investigation, no follow-up question, nothing. Just, okay, this is what they said. This is what we're going to pass off as fact. It's frustrating to see, but in the little twist of irony is the fact that this is happening in the age of social media. Back before social media, it used to be just passed off as absolute fact, and no one questioned it. And the average American, in their view of Israel and Palestine, they had built it upon what they were seeing on their news channels, what they were hearing from their favorite newscaster. But now we live in an age where the Israeli military will say, well, look at this paper on the wall. This is a list of names of terrorists. They are, it's a schedule to watch the hostages. I saw that as soon as it was broadcast. And I immediately said, no, that is a calendar. That says Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Such egregious lying. And it gets passed off as fact by what we consider to be credible news agencies. Listen, a lot of people don't know this, but mouthpieces for genocide can also be tried for war crimes at The Hague. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind. Complicitness isn't necessarily in the sense that you are pulling the trigger or that you are providing the weapons or the bullets. Complicitness also extends to being the mouthpiece that whitewashes these crimes, that excuses these crimes, that tries to paint a picture that says, well, what you saw isn't actually a crime. It was an act of self-defense. And look, the last 11 months have been extremely difficult, extremely disheartening, emotionally taxing, emotionally draining. But all I can say is when I compare it to what happened in 2014, the rhetoric has shifted magnanimously in the other direction.
If you, one more thing for you, if you had the opportunity to speak to Zionists, and I don't even want to go into like the Zionists that are part of administration, just in general, people that support Zionism, because I do not, and people that have been conditioned to believe that it is their right to have that land, what would you say to them?
I've been speaking to Zionists my entire life. I am a Palestinian. I've had to put up with this from the day I was born until now. Two things. And maybe I'm coming off a little harsh, but this is something that needs to be said. Anyone who's still on the fence 11 months later is not someone I would think is worth talking to, is not someone whose opinion I care about, is not someone whose feelings I'm going to pay any kind of attention to. We're 11 months into a live stream genocide where we are seeing a level of brutality that quite often you don't even see in films. You're seeing it happen in real life. And I want to remind everyone, I listened to an interview in Arabic by Al Jazeera journalist Wa'il al-Dahdouh, who was a journalist whose family was targeted in Gaza, and Israel tried to target him, and they got him out and into Qatar right now. He said something that sent a chill up my spine. He said, everything you see, we were not allowed to broadcast or report on 90% of what we saw. What we're seeing now is 10%. That death toll that you're seeing that's still stuck at 40,000, it's stuck at 40,000 for a reason, because Israel destroyed the Gaza Ministry of Health. My personal opinion, if this genocide were to end today, we'd be at around 210,000 Palestinians killed. That's a tenth of Gaza's population, decimated. There's a lot that can be said to people who feel like this is my land, so on and so forth. Look, Israel has made no secret of the fact that this is an actual land theft. Their politicians have said it, their citizens have said it, their mouthpieces have said it, that they said this is a blatant land grab. From the very initial inception of Zionism, Theodore Herzl in his manifesto talks about that, yeah, this land has natives and they may resist our colonization attempts. The mentor of Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, Zev Jabotinsky, wrote in a letter saying, look, these Arabs are going to resist our attempts to colonize them and to steal their land because we are colonizers and conquerors. He says this openly in a letter. They've made no secret of who they are and what their attempts are and what their intentions are and what they'd like to see happen to the Palestinians, who are the indigenous native population. A lot of people have been surprised at the rhetoric coming out of Israel. And I've told them, I was like, look, this is stuff that's been said all along. The only difference is it was said in Hebrew. And those of us who spoke Hebrew knew exactly what was being said. And now all of a sudden that there is a translate feature on social media where you can see what Israeli elected officials, not individuals, elected officials are saying. They're writing it out in Hebrew. You click translate and you're like, I'm sorry, is this a lost page out of the most genocidal book ever written? It's horrific. And I think people understand this wasn't just said now. This has been said the entire time. We just now have the tools to immediately translate what's being said.
That's right. Ahmad, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.